As contestation heats up on the campaign trail, political party leaders are putting their best foot forward to woo voters. Smaller parties are also campaigning for votes, many of them for the first time, but leaders from some established parties continue to question their motive for contesting the upcoming poll. Now, in a recent incident, Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen has been quoted questioning the campaigns of smaller parties in the Western Cape. To discuss this, I'm now joined by Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster, who's the deputy leader of BOSA. Nobuntu, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Katlego, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. So John Steenhuisen, the leader of the official opposition party, made some accusations against the smaller parties, and I see you chuckling there, saying that the intention is to line your pockets by contesting elections in the Western Cape. What was BOSA's initial reaction to these comments made by John Steenhuisen?
I mean, first of all, there's something that is something of a disdain for democracy by saying that smaller, and what we say is that we newer parties, actually. Because essentially, what's most important is that we new and we have new ideas and we have new ways of doing things, that those parties should not be contesting in elections. So that's the first thing. The second is to take ownership of a province as a political party shows a disdain for democracy, because it is the people who must decide who they want to govern. And it's saying that it doesn't matter what the people want. It doesn't matter that these parties have constituencies. We have constituencies. We have people who have been part of establishing our parties. We have people who believe in what we stand for. And to say that those people should not have representation is then to actually spit on the very democracy that we have and that was so hard fought for.
So what he makes particular reference to, his utterances, particularly with regards to the Western Cape, that shouldn't be contested because it's working, it's functional. I mean, there's 8 other provinces that other parties could be contesting in. Do we see the Western Cape as being flawless?
Absolutely not. The Western Cape is a couple of South Africas. It is not one South Africa. The Western Cape works for some, and it works in some areas, but it doesn't work for everyone. We were in Gugulethu today, and that is an area where you will find sewage on the road. That is an area where you'll find heaps of rubbish on the corners of the road. That is an area where you'll find housing that is inadequate, first of all, and that should not even be expected for humans to stay in some instances. And so to say that the Western Cape works and works best for everybody is not true. The second thing is to say that, you know, the DA boasts about employment, but there's over 800,000 people who are unemployed in the Western Cape. By the expanded definition, about a quarter of the Western Cape is unemployed. And to make things worse, when you speak of employment, that is to speak of only what is mainstream economy. And the DA has been part of preserving the spatial injustice that exists in the Western Cape, where even those who do work have to travel from their places of residence to their places of work for hours on public transportation that does not even always work for them. So to say that the Western Cape is flawless is far from the truth. The Western Cape works for some and not for all South Africans.
What's your take on an opposition party existing in a region in order to better the services or to better the efforts of the current governing party?
It's absolutely important. You have to have an opposition party that exists. You have to have an opposition party that holds the governing party to account. And you have to have a strong opposition party. And in fact, you have to have strong opposition parties that hold that governing party to account. Otherwise, you will have instances where you keep the status quo. In the Western Cape, it will mean you keep the status quo of 2 South Africas. You keep the status quo of a Western Cape that works for some and doesn't work for others.
But we must admit, it seems as though the Western Cape is working better than other provinces.
It seems to be the case, only because that is the picture that has been painted. I mean, the picture that I've just painted right now of just the infrastructure in the townships of the Western Cape, the picture that we speak about now of even just the housing and the unemployment in the Western Cape shows you the reality that, in fact, that isn't the case for everybody. And I mean, as Build One SA, when we look at what we're putting on the table, when you look at our manifesto and what we've tabled, is that you have to have a South Africa that works for everybody. When you look at our jobs plan, we focus particularly on the township economy, because that is where you have to be able to create jobs. so that people are able to live where they work, so that you have infrastructure that is being built and that is being improved in those areas for the economy to thrive there, but also for just a better life for people in those areas.
Speaking about that manifesto, I mean, you are the Gauteng Premier-elect for Build One South Africa, and I can imagine that most of your efforts are directed to the vision that you have for the Gauteng province. But also as Deputy Leader, there's a lot of work that you're doing in terms of seeing other provinces and how you can establish the party and your presence in those. What strategy do you have for the Western Cape?
So our strategy for the Western Cape is focused on spatial injustice and making sure that in everything that we do, we are starting to eradicate the effects of that spatial injustice. So when you look at infrastructure, you have to make sure that you're starting to build infrastructure that makes it possible for other areas to be able to also thrive and work, but also for interconnectedness and for people to be able to work in different parts of the province, travel between different parts of the province, and actually have the economy circulating throughout the province. So that's the first most important thing. The second is around housing. It's important when you look at the issues of spatial injustice, housing is very important, making sure that you have housing that is adequate, making sure that you have housing that actually gives people agency to be able to say, and you know, one of the biggest things for us as Build One SA, and this cuts across the board, what we've always said is that we're about putting power back in the hands of people. And you will see that in the way that we have had our leaders selected. They've been selected by communities. You'll see that in our economic policy, which is about SMEs and ownership of businesses. You'll see that in our education policy, which is about parents being able to choose the schools their children go to. But you'll also see that in issues like housing, making sure that people are able to actually be given the allocation that would have been used for their housing to be able to build their own houses. And we want to do that in the Western Cape and in other provinces as well.
So a very detailed plan with regards to how you see Build One SA running South Africa in the coming years and certainly hopefully for many generations to come. Now, the DA is at the forefront of the multi-party charter. Do these utterances embody the spirit of a multi-party democracy?
Absolutely not. And so, I mean, we get asked about the multi-party charter all the time. And part of it is that when you hear utterances like that are really not in the spirit of building a multi-party democracy, you then get discouraged about, you know, how that could or might work or might not work. You know, that is the first thing. The second is to say that you have parties that are actually, in essence, competing against each other, even in this election. And what we've done as BOSA is that we formed the BOSA Alliance, which we launched 2 weeks ago to the country, although we've been working with many of these parties right from the start when we launched BOSA in 2022. But what we said is, let's work together. Let's be able to support one another as parties. And these parties agreed that for the national and provincial elections, BOSA is what's on the ballot. Come local elections, we will be supporting these parties in their various territories. But in that way, we're saying that we're not splitting the vote. We're actually consolidating the vote, and we're coming and working together in that spirit and supporting each other. But more than anything, we are truly representative then of communities and of constituencies.
Nobuntu, I'm sure you get this question quite a lot as a party deputy leader. I mean, with the May 29 elections coming up, we are most likely going to see a lot of coalitions on a national and a provincial level. In the BOSA corridors, who are you willing to create coalitions with and govern with across the board?
We're willing to govern with people who hold the same values as we do. That's the first most important thing. The second most important thing is we are willing to work with parties that have put as the agenda and that agree as the agenda that South Africans come first. We're happy to work with parties who will say it is not about positions and access and proximity to the coffers, but it is about what is the expertise that you bring to the table. What is the strong policy that you bring to the table? You as a party focus on that. We'll focus on this area, and we work together to building one South Africa. We've heard from parties who say we'll partner with these ones if we get this position, but that's not what we're about. We've got to be able to agree on values. We've got to be able to agree on the issues that are most critical to South Africans and say those are what we're going to focus on, and we've got to be able to bring our own muscle and expertise and skills as parties towards doing that and building together.
All right, Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Giving us your take there with regards to John Steenhuisen's DA leaders' utterances with regards to smaller parties looking to line their pockets by contesting